So here's Suzhou, and I'm sorry for the reflection on the window. It's hard not to get a reflection here. You can really see the smog, the air pollution. That's been present in all of the cities I've been in so far, but it seems to be the worst here. This is what I think is called the new business district of Suzhou, and it doesn't really show you the full size of the city. It really just keeps going. I'll try to zoom in so you can see. See, there are many more tall buildings out there in the distance, but with the smog you can barely even see them. Suzhou is also well known for its parks. We can see one right down there. And it's also well known for its canals. I don't see any from here. There's a pool down there. I assume that leads to a canal. More tall buildings under construction over there, which again has been a theme throughout this entire trip. And out there in the distance, here I'll zoom in so you can see it. You can just barely make out a big pagoda. There it is. You see it? Can you see it? That is a famous pagoda. I'm drawing a blank on the name right now. Here, I'll show it at the bottom of the video in text. Yeah, there it is. So the pagoda was on the short list of tourist sites to which I considered going today, but you've seen one pagoda, you've seen them all, and it's kind of far away. So, you know, what are you gonna do? Sorry, pagoda.
KP, Watershed, America's favorite YouTube show.
Ni hao from Suzhou. Good morning. This is now day... what is it now? It's day 11 of this trip. I've decided to leave Suzhou pretty early this morning. Sorry, Suzhou. It's just a product of wanting to have some more time in Shanghai on Thursday, and if I want to have time in Shanghai on Thursday, I've got to leave Uzhen relatively early on Thursday morning, and I also really want to have a full day in Uzhen, the canal town where I'll be heading today. So, sorry, Suzhou. Yeah, I also, I got to do some exploring, albeit inadvertently, last night when I got lost. And, in doing some searching on the internet, it seems like there's no real must-see site in Suzhou. It's got some famous gardens, which are supposed to be really nice. It's got some famous pagodas and temples, but I have a hard time believing that any of the gardens here will be better than the gardens in Nanjing. I have a hard time believing that any of the temples will be that different or that much better than the temple in Hangzhou. And pagodas, you've seen one pagoda, you've seen them all, or so I hear. So I'm gonna head out and head down to Uzhen. Still have to figure out how I'm going to do that. I'd prefer not to take a bus, and there are no direct trains from Suzhou to Uzhen, which is a much smaller town than any of the cities where I've stayed up until this point. It's a canal town. I've never been to any canal town before, so I'm excited to see it. I don't count Suzhou as a canal town. There are some canals here, but it's, from the pictures at least, seems to be quite a bit different from the small, let's call it a canal village, that Uzhen is. So before I head downstairs to figure out and then begin the trek to Uzhen, let's quickly look back and recap the cities I've been to thus far on this trip and compare them to some US cities. So Shanghai is obviously the New York City of this area, or the New York City of China, I guess you could say. Now don't get me wrong, Shanghai and New York City are very different, and I talked about some of those differences in the earlier Shanghai videos. But that being said, in terms of size and significance and meaning to the area and to the country, Shanghai and New York City are at least equivalent there. Hangzhou, so if you took Boston and then attached Yellowstone National Park onto it, I think that's a good analogy for Hangzhou. The parks and the lake, West Lake, are just phenomenal, and while Boston doesn't have anything quite like that in terms of nature, the downtown area I think is, well, it's bigger than Boston, but it's similar in that it It's a big city that's kind of got a small town feel to it, much like Boston, and it's also got a rivalry with nearby Shanghai that reminds me a lot of the rivalry between Boston and New York City. So that brings us to Nanjing, which is still my favorite city that I've seen up to this point on this trip, including Shanghai. Nanjing, it reminded me in a lot of ways of Chicago in that it's got kind of a second city feel to it. You know, it's not as big as Shanghai, it's not as well known as Shanghai. However, in a lot of ways, it measures up. It's got a really nice balance of parks and urban downtown areas. The downtown is very modern, very lively. It's a more sophisticated city, I think you could say, than Suzhou or Hangzhou. Definitely a bit more westernized than either of those two cities. Not to say that Western equals sophisticated, but it's just got a more diverse mix of sights and people and styles. It's got its own style of food, much like Chicago. And unlike Chicago, it's also got a rich, rich history, more than 3,000 years of history, and also some really interesting, although tragic and sad, World War II history, which was being commemorated while I was there during the 70th anniversary of Japan's surrender in World War II. That brings us to Suzhou. Suzhou, according to Wikipedia, has Jacksonville, Florida as a sister city, and I think that's really accurate. As I was walking around last night, I was thinking Suzhou reminded me a bit of Cleveland. I think Cleveland, Jacksonville, those are fair comparisons. It's a big city, it's bigger than Cleveland or Jacksonville, much bigger, and it's got all the amenities of a big city. However, I wouldn't say that it's got any real distinguishing features or sites that you have to see. Now, I hate to not give it its due. Again, I have not spent very much time here, and other than getting lost last night, I haven't really had a chance to go exploring much. But even talking to people here and looking on the internet, unlike Hangzhou, where everybody says you gotta see Westlake, you gotta see the Buddhist temple, you gotta see the tea farms, and unlike Nanjing, where you've got Dr. Democracy's mausoleum, and you've got Xuanwu Lake, and all the parks, and so many more sites that people recommended in Nanjing that I didn't have a chance to see. In Suzhou, even here, when you ask the locals, hey, I'm here for a day, what's the best site or sites I should go see? They kind of shrug their shoulders and say, the parks, the gardens, I guess. So, sorry Suzhou, I'm sure you've got some hidden gems in the city somewhere, but I won't have a chance to see them firsthand myself during this trip. Now, one thing that I did have a chance to do in Suzhou while I was walking around lost last night was
wake up, little Susie. Wake up, little Susie. Well, what are we gonna tell your mama? What are we gonna tell your papa? What are we gonna tell our friends when they say, ooh la la, wake up, little Susie?
It's KP Watershed.
Next time on the KP Watershed channel.